This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
That's right. Back at it again with some straight shoot wrestling talk here on YouTube and Rumble. Welcome to the show, everyone. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. Here every Monday and Friday to bring you wrestling discussions and show recaps, ranging from AEW to NWA to all the classic content as part of our retro review series. If you are new to the show, please make sure you subscribe, comment, and like down below. Again, that is 2 weekly shows we host here on YouTube and Rumble, Mondays and Fridays. In addition to the podcast shows, I also write article content for the Chairshot website, which we discuss in detail every Monday as our final talking point. If you head on over to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion tab, and all of my work is labeled under the name Star. The majority of my work, shall we say, has been opinion content from the onset, and it's kind of a formula that works for me, given, I already do recap shows here, and I don't really feel the need to regurgitate news info that every other wrestling media platform reports on each week. So I highly encourage you guys to go check it out and see what you like. And you can also check the description each week for a quick link if you just want to head on over for a quick view of my recent publication. Definitely have a big talking point to cover on that at the end of the show. But before we get into that, I do want to run down my wrestling recap reports first. As per usual, we will kickstart things with talking about Rampage from Friday night. This is the November 19th show for anyone that is keeping track in the archives. Our opening match for the night is Darby Allin versus Mr. Ass. A ring name that will forever live in infamy. Much like the 1999 singles push of Badass Billy Gunn altogether will live in infamy. Don't tell him I said that. But never mind Billy Gunn's ass. How about those pecs, bro? Dude's in impeccable shape for a mere age, what is he now, 58? Something like that. So I will flat out admit, I glossed over this whole setup to this match very briefly on my Dynamite report this past Friday. I had no idea this would end up being as entertaining as it was. And most of that was due in large part to Billy Gunn being a complete and utter douchebag heel. But it totally worked in the context of what they were doing. Billy Gunn is a 30-plus year veteran. He's 6'5", probably a legit 250 to 260 pounds, going up against a scrawny kid that is well under 6 feet and probably $150 on a good day. So the whole concept of the match being built around Gunn just toying and tossing Darby around like a pinball and making a complete mockery of the whole match, it worked. Yeah, Gunn is a fantastic pompous heel. Darby was a phenomenal babyface in peril. They played off each other well. Sting was great in this segment, just eyeballing Gunn down from start to finish. I'll even give Austin and who's the other kid's name? Colton, something like that. The Gunn Sons, I guess we'll call them. But those guys were great here too, just playing the role of the twerpy Beavis and Butthead sons, cheering on while their dad is just pulverizing this poor Darby fella for an hour. Yeah, this totally worked as a TV match. I especially got a kick out of the ending where Darby hits the first coffin drop and Gunn totally no-sells the first one and kicks out before a 1 count. Just to let Darby know, You're going to have to work harder to win that one, brother. I ain't going down that easy. And then Darby just hits a second coffin drop 10 seconds later, and Gunn made sure he kicked out at 3.1 anyway. That is how you do politics, brother. Got to make sure Gunn comes out of this one looking strong, too. I'll tell you, man, watching this match and checking out that little heated showdown between Billy Gunn and the Icon. Hey, AEW's going to need some upcoming big matches for that January show. I mean, what are they basically referring to as? Like a Clash of the Champions kind of thing? Well, can you think of a better dream match than Billy Gunn versus Sting in the main event? Two former champions, clash of whatever ring style they can bring to the table at this point. I think it could be great. And pile that on top of Hangman Page versus Bryan Danielson for the AEW World title in the semi-main. Keyword there being semi-main. That show could turn out to be better than Full Gear. Well, joke and cock blocking aside, this segment was great. With the exception of Jericho's commentary, because, well, hashtag Jericho ruins everything. We had a brief QT Marshall promo challenging CM Punk to a match this coming Wednesday. And albeit I would not say I am salivating at the mouth to see a QT Marshall match again, I did get a nice chuckle out of the end of the interview here with Tony where he just goes, "Accept my challenge, Punk, unless you're afraid that I'll put you to sleep in your hometown." Like a complete dork, he nudges Tony and goes, "See what I did there?" Tony, with absolute perfect timing and delivery, just goes, "Yeah, I see what you did, QT." QT's just nodding his head like he's totally proud of himself for that bullet one-liner. In fact, you know what this reminded me of? This is like the skit on My Cousin Vinny where the public defense counselor stammers his way through the opening statements to the jury and he's spitting all over him, just completely making a total ass of himself. And then he walks back to his table with swag waving at the judge like he just totally nailed it. Fucking awesome. What was not awesome was hearing Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page cut a promo on the Inner Circle, inferring that their feud is not over. No bueno. Jade Cargill wrestled Red Velvet in... I think it was a tournament match, wasn't it? At least I thought that's what Excalibur said. You know, it's really weird. Everything was running real smooth at first, and as soon as the bell rang for this match, I get a call from Kevin Kelly all the way from Japan. He said his monitor went out or something during this match, and damn it all, wouldn't you know it, same thing happened to me. What did I miss? Nothing much. A little bit of sloppy wrestling that had no business being on TV. How unfortunate. Well, maybe next time I can get lucky enough to experience a Red Velvet Jade Cargill rematch. Ooh. Gonna get my Scott Hall gif on the screen there. But by the way, though, I actually do have a genuine question. Her name is Jade Cargill, and her finisher is called Jaded, right? So, wouldn't Aerosmith's Jaded single be apropos for her theme music? Or am I just putting too much thought into that one? Oh, I'll follow up with this. At least I'll get to see a Thunder Rosa match this coming week. Maybe it'll be good. Who knows? And... whoa, are we already at the main event? Yeah, I guess we are. Boy, that flew by fast. Yeah, granted, I did skip over a couple recap video packages here and there, and I think I missed a CM Punk interview where he outright mocked Jim Cornette. But, yeah, that doesn't really matter. Main event for the show was the Jurassic Express versus the Undisputed Era. Whoops, I guess that's copyrighted. My bad. Again, man, I gotta give him credit. I have been very hard on him for his less than stellar stick work in the past. Jungle Boy had another very good promo here in the pre-tape before the match. I like the little pot shot at Bobby Fish where he said, "The first time I ever saw a Bobby Fish match was the one I beat you in last week." Ugh, that one probably stung right in the taint. By the way, I was just thinking about this during the heels entrances. For some reason, Bobby Fish is now referring to himself as the infamous Bobby Fish, which can't remember if that was his nickname in Ring of Honor off the top of my head. But if he really wanted to go for something to troll WWE, why wouldn't he refer to himself as the artist formerly known as Bobby Fish? I don't know. So, let me set the precursor before we get into anything with this match. You watch my Full Gear recap. You would know that I really did not like the Elite versus Jurassic Express Christian Cage 6-man. And I pretty much kind of figured heading into the match that it wasn't going to be for me. And pretty much met my expectations. It was 20 plus minutes of car wreck, fake looking hardcore spots with way too many false finishes and near falls. It's not my flavor of wrestling, and it never has been. However, it is not to say that there aren't elements of this feud that I have enjoyed. Particularly, I've enjoyed the implementation of Bobby Fish into this story, especially for the possibilities of where it could go down the road with Adam Cole. You know, whether he splits from the Beta Bucks and pairs up with Fish as a team, maybe you throw Kyle O'Reilly in there once his contract expires at the end of the year. And there are a lot of ways you could go with this. And you take the Beta Bucks out of the equation here. I was really looking forward to this match going into the show. Cole and Fish are professional. They work with each other very well. They were the perfect heel dance partners for Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy here. And while I would not say this is the most fluid match from beginning to end, there were enough good elements here that made this an enjoyable watch. And one of my favorite parts of the match, believe it or not, was the spot where Cole was going to go for the Panama Sunrise, but Jungle Boy ended up launching Cole into Luchasaurus so he could do the powerbomb. There was a part of me that was thinking Luchasaurus was going to go full-blown barbarian mode. Instead of just straight up catching Cole in the powerbomb, I thought he was going to do the deal where Jungle Boy would do the backdrop to Cole overhead, and then Luchasaurus would kind of like catch him upside down, and then he would hoist him up for the powerbomb. And if you guys need a visual representation of what that looks like, just go Google search some old Faces of Fear matches from WCW, and I'm sure you'll find that spot somewhere in there. Anytime Barbarian and Meng were doing tag matches on TV, you knew it was going to be special. But, when you actually look at the scope of how things were laid out here, it was very basic, very paint by numbers in terms of formatting. But again, much like I said with the opener, it worked. You know, they let the baby faces run wild early on. They did a fantastic transition into the heat spot where Fish snagged Aubrey, claiming he had something in his eye. And again, because all AEW officials are complete numbskulls, Aubrey fell for this hook, line, and sinker. And of course, that's when Cole cut off Jungle Boy behind her back. Fish and Cole spent a good chunk of the match working over Jungle Boy, with Luchasaurus pacing back and forth on the apron like a wild man. Of course, crowd's going nuts for him. Luchasaurus eventually got in there to do his deal, which, I mean, his offense is always kind of hit and miss depending on what time of the month it is. Sometimes it looks clunky. Other times he's a total house of fire and everything's just very smooth with what he does. Friday night was kind of a grab bag of all mixtures. Generally, I would not say anything he did was reckless or sloppy, though. They had a nice couple of near falls in this match, but unlike the pay-per-view where they did every WrestleMania kick out in the fucking book, they didn't go overboard with this one. And yes, we did get the whole garbage at the end with the Bucks coming out and getting chased off by Christian, which was totally unneeded and added absolutely nothing to the overall match. But the whole deal at the end was Cole, for the second time now, ditching Fish and leaving him to bite the bullet by tapping out to the snare trap in the middle of the ring. And again, that one's still a bit wonky for me. Yeah, I said last week, I really don't like the idea of them already teasing conflict with Cole and Fish, especially when they just kickstarted this whole alliance deal. I get the idea that, Fish is just the fall guy right now, so Cole doesn't have to do clean jobs. But there are better ways to go about booking this than having Cole essentially bailing on Fish altogether. But minor gripes aside, it was a very solid main event tag match. One of my more favorite Jurassic Express tag matches I've seen in a while, and that was mostly due in large part to them keeping things very fundamental here. I'll say this real quick too, because this kind of just jumped out at me watching the match. The dynamics of the Jungle Boy Luchasaurus pairing is very weird to me. Like, you can clearly tell their primary focus is on spotlighting and singling out Jungle Boy, which, while I totally get it, God, they really could do so much more with Luchasaurus than just having him play the background gimmick. And one thing I always wondered to myself is how they miss golden opportunities to do some pre-tapes of Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy doing autograph sessions and, hanging out with some younger kids before the show. Like, you want to talk about the perfect way to branch out from your primary demographic and bring in that younger fan base. If I were Tony Khan, I would be making every effort I can to get the Jurassic Express out there appealing to the younger age demographic. Autograph sessions, campaign donations, special appearances, event hangouts, like anything you can possibly think of to get that younger age bracket. And yes, granted, that may mean in the short term that they have to cut out some of the more edgy content. For example, them dropping the word shit in every 5 segments they do. Jericho, I'm looking at you. Or, maybe I'm just putting too much thought into this and AEW will continue gearing toward the same male 18 to 49 demographic and continue to stagnate with their same fan base, and now it'll turn out to be the ultimate demise of their company. That said, this is a very good show from top to bottom. It is just unfortunate that I may or may not have skipped over that women's match that may or may have not been intentional on my part. Don't worry. I'm sure it was an instant classic. All in all, though, I've said this before with AEW's TV shows. While I appreciate the efforts of them trying to go with the all-or-nothing, go big, go home approach, not every single TV show they do needs to be a home run classic. Sometimes simple and formulaic is the best approach to take. And this is one of those shows where they didn't get too fancy with anything, they didn't do anything breakneck pace, and nothing on the show was overly insulting, discounting the Bucks. And again, a lot of this may stem from the fact that the show is only an hour and it's generally an easy show to get through. But even if this winds up being a, quote, forgettable show when we look back at it in a month or so, it was still enjoyable. Anyway, moving on to NWA here. This was another one of those Powerrr Surge episodes, which means there really wasn't a whole lot to report on this week. The main theme for the show was all centered around the finals of the tag tournament to determine the number 1 contenders for the belts which are currently held by La Rebellion, and albeit I totally forgot those guys were a thing. Other than that, though, show was just kind of there this week with some matches that just kind of happened. JTG and Slice Boogie were having a decent TV match until the run-ins at the end with Colby Corino and Sal Renaro. And after about 2 consecutive minutes of said run-ins, they finally called for the bell to throw the match out. Kenzie, Paige, and Kiera. Hogan was not very good, but at least we got a clean finish in that one. By the way, what is the deal with Kiera? Am I crazy or was she not signed to AEW? Like, I know they'd done the crossover talent exchanges before. Like, I think they did that with Thunder Rosa last year before she just signed an exclusive contract with All Elite. But it's so weird. I always feel like Kiera Hogan's name pops up all over the place. Melina and Sky Blue was slightly better than the previous match, but again, nothing incredibly noteworthy. In fact, my only notes on this one were, oh look, a different hard camera angle, and what appeared to be an actual full house. Yeah, this is clearly a tape show. Black G's and Princess Yuma was a match that I enforced what I would now like to refer to as the Austin Idol canon. Much like Jim Cornette can coin the tooth and nail roll with AEW, I have decided that 2 consecutive weeks of Austin Idol's god-awful color commentary was enough torture, and I was not about to subject myself to a 3rd week in a row of basically him going into business for himself. So I skipped that match entirely. At this point in the show, we had one of the more clever things I've actually seen done in wrestling in a while, believe it or not. So, Joe Galli directs attention to some exclusive footage that went down after the By Any Means Necessary show last week. And they cut to some footage of Trevor Murdoch in the ring taking pictures with some fans and I guess doing a couple autographs. And they still have the cage set up around the ring. And actually, one of my favorite parts of this whole thing was Kyle Davis going, and fans, we'd also like to turn your attention away from the white powder and alcohol. Of course, for those of you that didn't watch the cage match from last week, the big spot in that match was Jax Dane throwing powder and rubbing alcohol into Crimson's face to win the match. And apparently the ring crew did not feel obliged to clean up said powder and alcohol before they decided to do this fan fest deal. Must have smelled like shit. Hope no one got high off those alcohol fumes. But yeah, the best part of this whole exchange was after Davis had directed fans to ignore the powder and alcohol in the ring, there was one single fan that got picked up over the camera audio that just nonchalantly goes, "Ignore the alcohol? That's the only reason I'm here." Gotta fucking love those goofball NWA fans sometimes. Anyhow, the key to the whole segment was that Mike Knox ends up showing up, and he jumps Trevor inside the cage, which I presume we were supposed to believe was a shoot. Because as far as I know, I don't think Knox was ever signed to NWA, and he sort of just jumped out from the crowd before locking himself in the cage with Trevor. And by the way, yes, I did actually have to go back and rewind this to make sure that this was in fact Mike Knox and not Braun Strowman. The only thing I saw at first glance was generic big bald guy with bulky arms and a giant beard. And my first instinct was, oh cool, Strowman's in the NWA now. And then I rewound it and found out it was Mike Knox, and I was a little less than impressed. And had it not been for the fact that Knox was physically struggling to lock the chain around the cage door, so the refs ended up having to help him out off camera, I probably would have been able to somewhat buy this whole attack, but yeah, that spot didn't look all that great. And you could tell they did their best to hide it off camera by keeping the camera focused on Knox stomping Trevor in the corner. But, like, while it's going on, you can hear the refs actively working together to chain the thing around the door. So, like I said, it was just kind of goofy. Plus, you factor in all the whiffed-looking chair shots and the fact that apparently every wrestler working for the NWA forgot how to scale a cage without a roof to help Trevor. Oh yeah, and people in the background booing and doing the "you suck" chants. Yeah, that didn't help this case all that much to make this come across as a shoot element. Now that said, it was a cool angle. And if it weren't for the fact that it was Mike Knox, this probably would have come off better in the long haul. I guess my question is, why Mike Knox exactly? I mean, they already got the Pope and Jax Dane at the top of the totem pole right now for title contention. And not that I have anything against Mike Knox, but I mean, he's Mike Knox. The only thing I ever remember about Knox is the brief push he got in WWE for all of like 5 minutes because he was a big, generic, beefy looking dude. And when it quickly set in that he wasn't all that good, they let him go. And, well, now he just kind of showed up again here. Now with less hair. So, guess we'll see how it goes. I mean, he's apparently getting the title shot at the Hard Times pay-per-view in a couple weeks, and I don't know. And by the way, why wouldn't they have the cops arrest this guy as soon as he broke out of the cage? Like, they have all this ring security standing around, and Knox gets out of the cage with a chair, and the cops just let him go. Doesn't really sound like a very efficient security team. And the main event for the show was Odinson and Pero versus PJ and Luke Hawx in the tag tournament finals, which ended up being a very simple but very fun main event. It was actually pretty similar to the layout of the Rampage main event, but instead of the faces getting the triumphant win, Luke Hawx tried to make a valiant comeback at the end and then quickly got smashed and destroyed by the end. And while I cringe every time I see that modification of the Doomsday device they do, where I think it's Odinson, the bigger guy on the team, he's the one that has the guy up on his shoulders, and instead of doing the back bump with the guy on the electric chair position, he ends up just flipping the guy over his head, and I guess praying that the guy taking the bump doesn't spike himself on the top of his head. Well, Luke was pretty close, but that one's a little shady for me. I do like this Odinson Pero team, though. I think I've actually seen some of their indie work before, so they've been around for a while. I don't ever recall them working for any major company, though. I know for a fact they weren't with WWE at any point. Maybe they were in TNA for a cup of coffee, but like I said, they're a solid monster heel team, and their stuff does look pretty crisp. Should be a fun main event, or it should be a fun match when they wrestle La Rebellion for the belts at the upcoming pay-per-view. Like I noted at the beginning of the show, though, there wasn't a whole lot to report on with this one. The big takeaway was the Mike Knox angle, and I mean, I can go either way with that one. Obviously, he's not winning the belt or anything, but like I said, with Pope and Jack Stane in the equation, this one just kind of feels like an unnecessary buffer match. But I guess we'll see where the fallout goes, and whether or not he ends up sticking around after the December show, I really don't know. Anyhow, I do want to close out this week by talking about something that, well, originally I was kind of late to the party on, but it has recently come back up on the TV show and also amongst the wrestling media. So I guess it's topical again. That is this whole discussion and story built around the AEW 4 pillars. And a lot of this conversation stems from a promo that MJF did on Dynamite back in late September, which feels like forever ago at this point, but I believe that is the first time we heard anything resembling this term 4 pillars get mentioned in any capacity on AEW TV. And the whole premise of the early stages of MJF's promo all centered around what he coined as the 4 primary cornerstones / standard bearers of AEW. The 4 names I'm referring to are Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, Darby Allin, and MJF himself. These are sort of AEW's 4 guinea pig younglings that they primarily pulled from the indie circuits, never worked a major organization before, were relatively new to the business in terms of training and experience. But by and large, these guys had a pretty significant cult following amongst the internet community. They were the guys that a lot of the dirt sheet sites told people to keep on their radar as probable future main eventers and big stars, that whole cilantro. And While I personally didn't know a whole lot about these guys prior to their AEW debuts, with the exception of MJF, who I remember did some work for MLW a couple years back when I was reviewing that show. But for the indie fans that saw these guys work PWG shows and some of the more recognizable independent feds, these were sort of the bread and butter of the indie circuit at one point, at least in terms of household names. But when I did some deeper diving into this whole discussion, I started really thinking about, well, okay, what does MJF necessarily mean by AEW's four pillars per se? Is it purely just a discussion over these guys being there from the beginning? Or is it the fact that MJF is seeing these guys collectively as the past, present, and future of AEW's product in terms of star power and drawing ability? And for me, that's where I really had to pump the brakes and start doing some critical analysis of this, because while we can argue from one point of the aisle that these guys have bright futures in AEW, and they certainly could become bigger stars in their own right, to try and stake the claim that these are undoubtedly the four future megastars of AEW as a company, that is an entirely different argument. And before we get too deep in the rabbit hole here, the general consensus here regarding MJF's classification of AEW's four pillars seems to occupy many of the elements of what people refer to as the four pillars of heaven from All Japan. And that was sort of a trope that existed around the early 90s and carried on through the early 2000s. Among that class, you had Akira Taue, Kenta Kobashi, Toshiaki Kawada, and Mitsuharu Misawa. And I apologize up front if I butchered any pronunciation of any or all those names. I do not speak Japanese. But when you look at those four men as a class, this is kind of where that initial idea of the four pillars discussion stems from. These men were viewed as the top ring workers throughout All Japan's 10-year timestamp from the 90s to the 2000s. I believe they collectively garnered more 5-star match ratings on the Meltzer rating scale than any other wrestler from any other organization at any point in history. And yes, it is a subjective rating system in and of itself, one that I probably think is incredibly distorted and people take way too seriously in 2021. But it's a match rating system nonetheless. And by that same token, there is an argument to be made that at this point in history, these four men were All Japan's, quote, top guys by this point in the 90s. So, from a broad perspective, I kind of sort of see where the comparisons come from. But I also think it's important to take into account the reaction of the horse's head himself, Mr. President Tony Khan. How does he view MJF's statement on AEW's four pillars, in or out of kayfabe? Well, according to his interview with Brandon Walker on Barstool Sports, he doesn't seem to be fully convinced of it. I'm pulling this from my article here. Tony Khan neither accepted nor refuted MJF's statement. Rather, he seemed to treat it as a subjective idealism with the recognition that MJF merely comprised an opinionated list as to whom he perceives as AEW's future four guys, unquote. Continuing along from the words of Tony himself, and this is actually taken from him directly from the interview, there's more than four pillars. We talked about Orange Cassidy, Dr. Britt Baker. We can talk about Until We're Blue in the Face, Ricky Starks, and Hangman Page, unquote. And while I personally have less than stellar things to say about that goofball comedy clown Orange Cassidy, the one thing I will not deny is that, according to the AEW crowd, that dude is pretty much over wherever they do their live shows from. But my main point from the topic of Tony Khan's perspective is that it is in my personal belief that as the president of a major wrestling company, the idea of recognizing your top talent should be a crucial element of generating company publicity. Why should people pay money to see your product? Well, the answer is because we have so-and-so on the show, and he's wrestling so-and-so this week. We have a big appearance from so-and-so. We're building up to this big pay-per-view match between so-and-so. When I read Tony Khan saying, there's more than 4 pillars, it's more along the spectrum of Tony Khan saying, yeah, I mean, hypothetically MJF's right, but he's also flawed in his thinking. Because what Tony Khan's doing, essentially, is saying that he acknowledges that Jungle Boy, Sammy, and Darby and MJF are AEW's, quote, early building blocks, but does that necessarily translate to the vision of them collectively representing AEW's future as a company, maybe 5 to 10 years from now? Maybe. Maybe not. For my money, if Tony really felt that these 4 guys were the be-all, end-all of AEW's past, present, and future, wouldn't you think he'd be peachy and eager to jump on that bandwagon and recognize it as the truth? Well, of course, the problem is that there's really no way to recognize any of AEW's future stars when the reality is we don't know how the landscape will change between now and, say, the year 2025, or the year 2030, or the year 2035. Which brings us to our second issue here with MJF's 4 pillars claim. That is around the idea that his definition generally reflects this already preconceived notion that Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, Darby Allin, and MJF are on an equal playing field as potential main event caliber. Right now, from a fan point of view, having watched the show extensively for 2 years now, the only thing that I can claim for a fact that these 4 guys have in common at the moment is something resembling relative ring skill. Let's remove MJF from the picture for a minute because he's sort of an anomaly in this particular argument when it comes to the 5-tool element discussion that's commonly expected of top-of-the-card main event guys. Let's just look at Guevara, Allin, and Jungle Boy. What do we see as a commonality amongst these 3? Mediocre promo ability. They have varying levels of charisma, some of which are more exemplified than others, but do these guys exude anything resembling a young Stone Cold Steve Austin or Rock level of charisma and ring presence? Fuck no. Now, whereas a guy like Ricky Starks, yeah, there's a lot of young heel Rock in him there. And if you look at the way he carries and presents himself on television, you know what I'm talking about. What about when it comes to looks and physiques? Okay, yes, they're in shape, and their bodies look good. And, I know modern fans absolutely detest this argument, especially in today's era of wrestling, but sorry, folks, there's a part of this argument that carries weight and validity, despite what you've been conditioned to believe otherwise. Size, height, and body mass do matter. When 3 of your supposed top AEW pillars are well under 200 pounds, and honestly look like local bar bouncers could take them in legitimate fights, there's a problem there. Yep. When it comes to that whole 5-tool system of looking at the top-level player, you have to be able to decipher between a look and the look. A guy like Jungle Boy, he has a look. Good shape, solid physique, but looks like he's 14 years old and would get turned away at the door going into a club for being underage. And I like Jungle Boy, keep that in mind. Now, a guy like Powerhouse Hobbs, for example, that guy has the look. He's got the body, he looks like a grown adult, he looks like he could beat anyone's ass, and yeah, he's someone that you would not want to get into a physical entanglement with. The final thing when it comes to the 5-tool system, one that I think kind of gets glossed over the most, and this is also an extremely important tool: character versatility. Are all 4 guys capable of effectively flipping between roles as babyfaces and heels? Are they able to diversify their personalities? At the same time, can they modify their ring style to accommodate those character roles? And okay, I know people are going to throw the Sammy Guevara card at me and say, well, he's already shown he's capable of playing both sides of the aisle. And to that, I would say yes and no. Yes, he's played the role of heel and face, but has he actually worked as a heel and face? How did he change up his ring style and mannerisms when he wrestled as a heel versus wrestling as a face? Go back and watch the tapes, people. Not a whole lot. How did he change up his look to portray the heel role versus the face role? Again, not a whole lot. Like, the thing we always forget about the heel and face dynamic in wrestling is that it's not just a mere shift in personality. It's more than that. It's ring style. It's ring attire. It's promo delivery. It is a story-driven, complete character shift, and it's not as simple as flipping a switch and saying, oh, I'm going to work as a heel today, or I'm going to work as a good guy today. Like, I know watching years of WWE have really numbed us to expectations when it comes to the kind of dynamics of face versus heel, but it's an art form that no one really thinks through today in the business. One final point I want to make on this topic, and while I personally am not one to make a case for equity or equality of outcome as a means of success in any market or business enterprise, bear that in mind, people. I'm saying equity, not equality. I'm all for equality of opportunity in the business, but equality of outcome is something entirely different. And there is a fair analysis that can be made that when it comes to this alleged four pillars group, you got to ask a question: how do these men stand out and differ from one another? I'm taking this directly from my article. Quote, a successful wrestling company should be able to culminate and craft a roster of broad skills, looks, and ability in order to garner attention from casual mainstream markets. AEW has a large talent pool of young athletes, many of whom come in different shapes, sizes, and skills. Unquote. Again, let's take MJF out of the picture for a minute. Although, as I do point out in my article here, a man who is not necessarily a big guy by his own right. Again, and I know this is going back to the height and weight thing, but look at Jungle Boy, look at Guevara, look at Allen on a paper point-blank standpoint. What do they have in common? They're small, they're frail, they're all well under 200 pounds, and they all wrestle very similar ring styles. And it's not to say those guys don't serve a purpose in AEW, because they absolutely do. If AEW wants to market and push their Jeff Hardy type of guy that fits the mold of the Daredevil high-action, fast-paced ring style, Darby's a perfect poster boy for that spot. But when you have an overly bloated roster full of 50 of those kinds of guys, and you're trying to push and advocate that most of those same style of athletes and ring styles should get pushed to that main event level, that's where you're going to run into some problems. It's the same argument as to why I would also never advocate that AEW tries to solely market their top spots around the big generic beefy guys like Brian Cage or Powerhouse Hobbs. You need a little bit of versatility. You need spice and variety, and especially from guys that could feasibly and effectively work those roles. You know, when I see people trying to argue that 3 of the 4 alleged AEW pillars are Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, and Darby Allin, as a longtime fan of the business, I see 4 Jeff Hardys. I see 4 Rey Mysterios. I see 4 Dynamite Kids. You know, they should absolutely have a spot for those kinds of Jeff Hardys, or one of those kinds of Rey Mysterios, or one of those kinds of Dynamite Kid performers. But 3 of them? There's no way for them to stand out. They all blend in with one another. To me, AEW needs a 4-pillar system of someone that exudes main event charisma, like an MJF or a Ricky Starks, someone that works a different ring style, Powerhouse Hobbs, Hangman Page, someone that can talk their ass off like an Ethan Page, and someone that could feasibly be a marketing success for the company. Look at all the successful wrestling factions and groups in history. All the variations of the Horsemen over the years, good or bad. Like, even take the original crew when you had Flair, Ole, Arn, and Tully. You had 4 distinct wrestlers with 4 distinct personalities and 4 distinct ring styles that were all different from the other. Evolution's another great example, just in terms of pure layout. You had Hunter at the helm as the top guy. You had Flair as the experienced veteran that could talk on the stick. You had the muscle of the group in Batista, who never said much and just beat people's asses. And then you had the good-looking pretty boy prodigy in Randy Orton that they were grooming to become a world champion down the road. I'll even throw some recent examples in there, like The Shield. 3 guys that had completely unique characters, wrestled different styles, but they were all being suited and groomed for future world title success. Like, these kinds of things have been done in the business before. I think sometimes we get so hung up on ring ability and like all the amazing athletic shit that these guys can do in the ring, we lose sight of what real main event top level potential looks like. And I do not want to dismiss guys like Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, and Darby Allin as not being able to achieve that kind of fame maybe 5 to 10 years from now. But I think we also should be honest with ourselves and recognize that maybe there are other guys that are coming up through the pike that could be better suited for those roles. And believe me, they're not exclusive to the names that I just mentioned, like Ricky Starks, Hobbs, Ethan, and Hangman Page, etc. I don't think we should get caught up in putting the cart before the horse and saying that these alleged 4 pillars are the be-all, end-all of AEW's future generation. And it's why when I see things like them selling AEW 4 Pillars t-shirts on AEWshop.com, it's concerning. Because how are we to know that these guys are going to be AEW's 4 future megastars? What if someone else comes down the pike and blows these guys out of the water? Are they going to have to pull the tees down from the shop and replace them with whoever takes their place? Just something to think about. And as always, if you want to read the article, it's on the Chairshot right now. I've left it as a link down below in the description if you want to check it out. It'll take you right over to the page. And I highly encourage you to give it a read. You might disagree with it. You might agree with certain points. Maybe you want clarification on a couple of particular talking points. But this is just my general overall consensus based on what I've heard, what I've seen as the follow-up, and how I see the wrestling media try to report this stuff. So, there you have it. Guys, if you want to check out future FSWR content, make sure you smash the subscribe button. Please like the show down below for me and leave a comment on any or all topics discussed today. We will be back on Friday for the next installment of the FSWR podcast, where we will continue along in our retro review series. And as always, we'll talk AEW Dynamite as well. Until then, take care all. Peace out.